Good morning, everybody. It's me, Dr. Kate, just checking in on this Monday morning to give some general feedback on the discussion board and clarify some concepts before you move on with this week's reading and your first unit exam that is due this week. So the discussion boards were great. I really appreciated how almost all of you used direct quotations to work through ideas and concepts and sort of reckon with some of the really challenging parts of both of these essays. So great job there. Your grade is already available. If you haven't done the discussion board, please send me an email so we can talk about ways you can make that up. But just a couple things that came up in the discussion board. First, this class was about split on if D'Amelio's argument was convincing or not. Remember, his argument is that gay identity happens when industrial capitalism happens. And there's sort of a couple ways that you all thought about this. One, disagreed heartily with his argument. And the disagreement seemed to stem from, I think, a slight misunderstanding of what he's saying. You can still disagree with his argument, but I just wanted to clarify this. When he says that industrial capitalism is necessary for the development of gay identity, he is not saying that same-sex desire and same-sex activity and same-sex sexuality doesn't exist prior to industrial capitalism. All he's saying is that the conditions required for the emergence of that as an identity, as a way of thinking about yourself and organizing your life with other people who are also gay, having the development of a gay culture and a way of supporting oneself completely outside the nuclear family and inside gay community, that's really new. And it's not the case in his argument that there were gay people who just couldn't come out until industrial capitalism. His argument actually is that a gay identity, a way of thinking, this is who I am, this is the core of who I am and the core of myself, that is actually historically brand new. And it's not an anti-gay argument. As I talked about in the opening lecture for the course, it's a historical approach called social construction that says, well, how was sexuality organized at a particular time and in a particular place? And his argument is that in the West, same-sex sexuality wasn't a problem, wasn't a type of person, wasn't a species of person until this point. And as a bunch of you pointed out in your discussion board post, that's because industrial capitalism allows you to literally survive outside the nuclear reproductive family. It also puts people in homosocial environments where desire is more likely to develop. So all those men on the factory floor, right, working together all day, desire arises that might not have had a chance to arise in agrarian societies in a bigger way. Also, having free time and money to spend allows people to do things like go to a bar. Right? You don't have the development of dating or of bar culture until you've got wage labor and free time. One of you pointed out in your discussion board post that doesn't mean that people got more free in industrial capitalism, and that's absolutely true. The definition of freedom in capitalism, according to Karl Marx, a gentleman you may have heard of, is that people are free to sell their labor on the open market and they're free of any other choice. So it's not freedom in the sense of I have no fetters at all, right? But it's a kind of freedom that is also really constraining, but it is part of the conditions that make it possible for gay people to emerge. So when we talk about, or when people talk about historical figures being gay or bisexual, like you may have heard, like Leonardo da Vinci was bisexual, the historians that we've read, both Rupp and D'Amelio, would argue that that's an anachronistic use of the term. The idea that your sexual identity makes you a different type of person is really contemporary. Did Leonardo da Vinci have sexual relationships with people of multiple genders? Quite likely. I'm not an expert on that, but that's not the same thing as what we mean when we talk about bisexuality in the contemporary period. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. I also want to draw your attention to the last part of his article. He thinks that it's really important to understand the way that gay people have built community in a culture that in many ways has wanted us to die, right? That's important how we've managed to build community outside of the nuclear reproductive family, and that as that family breaks down, because capitalism doesn't need it except insofar as it reproduces workers, people are facing the issue of how to support themselves and how to survive in their old age, how to raise children when the nuclear family doesn't do that in the same way anymore. And the people who know how to do that are gay people who figured out how to build those communities. So there's a political import to his argument as well that is not an anti-gay one, but one that says, what is the kind of epistemic privilege or special way of knowing that gay and lesbian people might have? So it's just a couple words about D'Amelio, and now a couple words about Rupp. So I noticed on the discussion board, a number of you were sort of struggling with how to think about sexual acts as anything other than sexual acts. And that is totally normal, right? If a penis goes into somebody's mouth, that sounds like oral sex to me. But Rupp's argument is that just because it sounds like that to us doesn't mean that's what it is. And it's super important to stay alive to the way that cultures define and experience sexuality, and how sometimes a sexual act is not about sex, but about transmission of knowledge, or about establishing power hierarchies, or about noting someone's emergence into adulthood, right? There are these cultural markers that are not the same thing as, say, being gay. So I think the two authors would agree on a lot of points and sort of the overarching point that I want you to take from this is how important it is as historians of sexuality to stay really attentive to the historical specificities and cultural specificities of what we're studying and where. One of the, I think, the most helpful ways of thinking about this is brought up in D'Amelio's piece and Rupp's piece, and a number of you mentioned it in your discussion board. There's a real big difference between sexual act or sexual behavior and sexual identity. So I think we can think about this in the contemporary period. If I'm a woman and I kiss a woman at a party and, just experimenting and it's just for fun and a joke, right? Or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a lesbian. It might be my entree into exploring my sexuality and coming to understand myself as a lesbian, but the mere act of the kiss doesn't establish a gay identity. There are a lot of reasons why a girl might kiss a girl that are not about expressing lesbian identity. So hopefully that sort of contemporary idea can help us sort of stay alive to this difference, right? And as I said in the first lecture, we're starting with these pieces because it's really hard to break out of the contemporary idea of sexual identity as a core part of who we are and as being almost timeless. But just because that's our common sense and that's how we probably experience it. I mean, I'm a lesbian and I don't experience that as because of capitalism. It's just who I am. But that doesn't mean that like my experience can't be translated to, 200 years ago and say, look at all these lesbians. So that's just some of the main points I wanted to touch on the discussion board. So happy reading this week, and I look forward to reading more of your work. And again, email me anytime you've got a question or a concern, or if you want some feedback on your exam before you turn it in. So I look forward to seeing you later.